Hello, how are you? All right, perfect. Welcome everyone to this week's issue of the fall series of Careers in Technology with Florence Hudson and William C. Harding. The episode that we're going to experience tonight of Careers in Technology is about the IEEE 2933 Working Group, which has been selected to be the recipient of the IEEE SA Emerging Technology Award for the development of IEEE 2933 2024 IEEE Standard for Clinical Internet of Things, IoT, Data and Device Interoperability with TIPPSS, Trust, Identity, Privacy, Protection, Safety, Security. The IEEE SA Emerging Technology Award is awarded for the initiation, advancement, or progression of a new technology, the IEEE SA Open Consensus Process. Leadership of this team, Florence Hudson and William Harding, PhD, will share their extensive knowledge and experience and provide an excellent deep dive into careers in this field. Florence Hudson is Executive Director for the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub, COVID Information Commons and Prototype Open Knowledge Networks projects at Columbia University, funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, and Department of Transportation Federal Highway Administration. She is founder and CEO of FD Hint LLC, a global advanced technology and diversity and inclusion consulting firm. She chairs the IEEE Clinical Internet of Things Data and Device Interoperability with TIPPSS, Trust, Identity, Privacy, Protection, Safety, and Security Working Group, and is on the IEEE Engineering in Medicine and Biology Standards Committee. She is a former IBM Vice President and Chief Technology Officer, Internet 2 Senior Vice President and Chief Innovation Officer, Special Advisor at the NSF Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, and Aerospace Engineer at the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab and Grumman Aerospace Corporation. She has served on NASDAQ listed company, industry, academia, and nonprofit boards. She is a globally renowned speaker, author, editor, board director, and trustee. She earned her mechanical and aerospace engineering degree from Princeton University and executive education certificates from Harvard Business School and Columbia University. William C.B. Harding is a professor and distinguished technical fellow, emeritus, with more than 40 years of industry experience, a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, a Master of Information Systems degree, and a PhD in Integrating Technology. William has had a very successful career in electrical engineering, information technology, and biomedical engineering. William has also initiated and championed innovative manufacturing solutions and patented biomedical and cybersecurity technologies that continue to have major impacts in the areas of improved patient outcomes, process improvement, manufacturing automation, product development, traceability, and FDA validation. Williams' professional career spans environments such as missile testing, tracking, for example, Eastern and Pacific Missile Test Centers, drug interdiction, U.S. Customs, rechargeable battery manufacturer from Energizer, and medical device design manufacturing at Medtronic. With more than 90 technical conferences, symposium presentations, lectures, seminars, published academic books, and technical papers under his belt, William continues to establish the highest level of standards through his mentoring and guidance that emphasizes his collaborative and an innovative vision. These are some of the, yes, right, that's wonderful. And this is some of the people who you'll see this fall series. We've already seen Professor Dr. Victor B. Lawrence and Professor Dr. Paul Berger. Tonight we have Florence Hudson and William Harding. And next week we'll have Al Spuntoff. And after that, we have Kandahar Nusrat Islam. So we have lots to look forward to this year. This is the website where you can catch all the videos of the former episodes and the links for the upcoming episodes. And to subscribe, please contact Mike Byron, and you'll be able to subscribe to the series or subscribe as an individual, either through your chapter or through as an individual. Whoops. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing, and we will turn this presentation over to Florence.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Let me share my screen and pray that the right one
Thanks,
comes.
Kit.
Thank you. That was wonderful, Kit.
I'm
Thank
glad.
you.
I'm glad. Thank you.
That was great. So, don't get dizzy. Close your eyes. We went through it once. So thank you so much for having us. And Liam William, he goes by both, so I might call him both. It's the same human. But thank you so much for joining us. And Liam, thank you for being part of this journey, which, as you said, we've been on together for 6 years. Oh my gosh, look at
It's
that.
been a wonderful ride.
It really has, and there's much more to do. We have a lot more to do. So we are talking about careers in technology and standards in action. So as Kit mentioned, we're talking about IEEE 2933. It's very exciting. We used to be P 2933, and then we were published, approved and published. So now we don't have a letter anymore. So 2933. And this is what we hope is the first in a TIPPSS related standard published by IEEE and Underwriters Laboratories. You've heard a lot about us. So we don't need to introduce ourselves again, but we are going to tell you a little bit about our careers in technology, since that's what this series is about. So this is a little bit about my professional journey. So I grew up in New York on Long Island. Before this, I got my BSc in Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering. I was a Grumman Scholar, a number of other scholarships that helped me get through Princeton. And then I got executive education certificates from Harvard and Columbia when I was an executive at IBM, and they wanted me to have more business skills. I told them, I'm really good at math. Just tell me what the numerator and denominators are, and I'll figure it all out. So I went to a couple of business classes in finance, accounting, and strategy development at those schools. My professional industry, government, and academia experience, I started out as a Grumman aerospace engineer, as a Grumman scholar. I worked at the NASA Jet Propulsion Labs, lived at Caltech. I worked on future missions around Jupiter. I worked on putting the electronics into documenting as we put electronics into Navy aircraft when the F-111 became the EF-111 and the A6 became the EA6. And so that was my first foray into what I call terrestrial aerospace. And then, of course, NASA, I worked on future missions around Jupiter. I also worked on the space shuttle program at Grumman. So, started out with wind tunnels and things and kerosene generators at Princeton. So I was at Hewlett Packard for a little while as a sales associate. I went from aerospace into IT. People say, how did that happen? And I say, well, I worked at NASA, I worked at Grumman, I worked on Jupiter. I did all this stuff. I'm like, okay, been there, done that. Now what do I do? And I looked around and I said, think IT is going to run the world today, so I'm going to go do that. God bless you, Stan. So I decided to go into IT, and I went to Hewlett Packard, then I went to IBM. I stayed there for actually a few decades, sometimes maybe like a few centuries. It's a long time in today's world. And I ended up becoming a VP of strategy and marketing and a chief technology officer. Then I retired from there, and I immediately went to become a senior vice president, chief innovation officer at Internet 2, which is a research education network, 100 gigabit per second connections to help researchers share data. And then I worked for the NSF Cybersecurity Center of Excellence as a special advisor at Indiana University. I started my own consulting firm because some people asked me to consult with them, so I did. And then I became chair of the 2933 TIPPSS working group, which we'll talk more about. Then executive director of the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub at Columbia, funded by NSF, NIH, and the Department of Transportation, and an author and editor with Elsevier, Springer, IEEE, and Akubo. It's kind of amazing. It's good. A woman of numbers, and I became a woman of letters. I have a lot of board experience. I suggest everybody do that. Just get started in it. I was on a NASDAQ listed board, IEC Electronics, which was in the aerospace industry, many nonprofits, and academia and government. So that's a little bit about me. And we're going to go through our whole presentation, and then we'll take questions at the end. So William.
Yes, ma'am.
Ready
So
for
yeah, thank you, Florence. And so I think Florence, actually knowing all her background, she's actually being quite humble. There's much more. But you heard the reference about the name. So Liam is actually the last four letters of William, and it's Irish for William. So nicknames, pretty much. You ever wonder where that came from? So I always tell people I'm a fifth generation Floridian, raised with beach sand between the toes. And I apologize for the lighting. We actually evacuated from Tampa. That's where I live. And Milton's heading right for my home, but it's safe. It's just they were going to shut us off, so we had to go. And I stole my brother-in-law's room here with three puppies behind me. So we'll be nice and quiet, but so it's an interesting thing. But yeah, so in either case, I started out in Florida, again, a fifth generation Floridian, and I thought it was kind of an interesting little mini fact I found. As is now a senior member of IEEE, that my great grandfather was a member in 1888 of the AIEE. And it actually, he was inducted at the same time as one of the Johnson, one of the guys who actually hired Thomas Edison. And I thought, wow, I'm following in the right footsteps. But so I actually moved from Florida up to Pennsylvania. I went to Milton Hershey. Ironic, the storm is called Milton, and I'm a Milton graduate. That's kind of a little weird. Studied pretty much electronics and IT at the time, and wonderful school if you're ever interested in Milton Hershey. Went on to do a computer science with an emphasis in electrical engineering, still up in Pennsylvania. And at that point in time, I said, I've got to move back to Florida. And coming back to Florida, I had the opportunity to work at Cape Canaveral. Was subcontracted multiple companies without moving my chair, pretty much switching all over the place, but specializing in Trident, Polaris, and Pershing missiles. Then had the opportunity to actually go to Point Mugu and work on some of the Japanese Defense Force and other systems. Effectively, if you ever know where St. Nicholas Island is, you'll know what I was doing. But at that point in time, moved on to GE Government Services, working in drug interdiction. So working on some of the L88 three-dimensional imaging radar systems along the whole, Rio Grande and areas there. But there was a point in time I said, you know what, I'd really like to do something that helps people. Engineering is engineering. So at that point in time, I actually said, I'm going to go work for Energizer, do some things and as a contractor and control systems. I do some things in battery rechargeable cells. And then was given an opportunity to work for Medtronic, which is the largest medical device manufacturer in the world. And I eventually reached the level of distinguished technical fellow, leading a team of about 488 technical fellows, living in Switzerland for quite a few years and Puerto Rico and whatnot. But was given the opportunity to build a lot of new technologies. I actually have a device in my back for pain control that has part of my patent material in it. So it's kind of neat to know that I'm responsible for my own quality of life. But at that point in time, I decided, it's time to do something special. I felt that I had a strong theory about various technology integrations and went and pursued my PhD in it. And since then, I've been able to utilize it specifically in advanced technology and data science. That's kind of when about time Florence and I met and got involved in the whole TIPPSS initiative. And then after about 25 and a half years, I said, you know what? I'm going to take my wife's challenge and pay it forward. And so I officially retired, though I'm technically a consultant still back from Medtronic. And I'm working with the Irish and Israeli groups right now still. But I decided to go into teaching. So now I'm a full-time professor at Trine University, and I'm teaching the future systems engineers. So little things, I've always been involved in altruistic endeavors such as Able for Disabilities and some of the things at the area consortium around and technology innovation. But I have my fingers in a lot of things, and I'm looking forward to this type of event being something that I can further that challenge of paying it forward.
That was wonderful. Did we talk about how I used to live at Point Mugu before this?
I don't think I knew that.
Oh my God. Another thing.
I know. Then where St. Nicholas Island probably is.
Oh my gosh. I remember, the sonic booms when I was trying to sleep because I didn't live that far from the runway, which happens.
We were on the receiving end of what we fired from there.
Oh my God. We'll have to talk more, Liam. So anyway,
yes,
we have a
sure.
lot. Yeah. And actually, that's an interesting thing that Liam and I have talked about before, is that many technologies and approaches that were used in aerospace engineering way back when are actually being applied in new areas like health and connected healthcare. The integrated systems design, the system of systems, the way we use data, the security and privacy issues, taking it very seriously, the mission-based approach that we have. And even in connected healthcare, I work a lot with National Cancer Institute as well. I've even been finding companies that are using finite element modeling and spatial analysis for tumors. I'm like, this is my world. So some of the tools that we had way back when in digital twins, now we're working on biomedical digital twins.
Exactly.
We had aerospace and mechanical and automotive digital twins decades ago.
Well, what I like what you just said there is one of the things as an example is some of the patent things we've done are based on the surface structures that we've done in missiles or just shrunk down effectively. But it's amazing how you can actually use that, we'll say, in lateral processes.
Absolutely. And They're very secure, custom stuff when we went to COTS, common off the shelf. That's like the Internet of Things, common off the shelf stuff. And so let's jump into this. And so this is a little background on why we created this standard. So as we know, advanced technologies enable digital transformation, but they can increase risk. There are more attack vectors. There are cute little things that people haven't worried about securing, perhaps. And IoT, along with blockchain or distributed ledger technology, machine learning, AI, augmented reality, big data, all these new things can create more risk. So as we look at it, we say, so why do we want to use all this technology? Well, the good news is that connected healthcare leveraging advanced technology and data can improve insights and outcomes. Precision medicine, precision oncology, leveraging connected healthcare devices and data, wearables or implantables, or the things that you connect to in a hospital or over the internet. Clinical care data, environmental data. As I say, there were fires in Canada and I had to get an air purifier for my living room in New York, because I could taste it in my living room. So there's environmental data that we might not have considered a very long time ago that we know is impacting us, our genome and exposome, as they say. Patient lifestyle data, clinical and fundamental research data, and all of this creates this compendium of healthcare data that we can leverage for new insights and outcome, to improve outcomes. But it's also a really great target, so for the bad guys and girls and bots. So if you actually, look it up on the dark web, or on, in bad ways for people who want to get personal information, I think a social security number is worth like $1 now, and a medical record's worth about 900. So it's a really big incentive for people to go after this. So we really have to secure it. So while it can bring a lot of benefit, as we said, more devices and data create more security and privacy attack vectors and risks. And this is a quote from Dr. Suzanne Schwartz at the US FDA. Any medical device connected to a communications network like Wi-Fi or public or home internet may have cybersecurity vulnerabilities that could be exploited by unauthorized users. And that's what we want to protect the humans' data and devices about. So increased connectivity brings this increased risk. So what could possibly go wrong? So the FDA has actually identified software vulnerabilities that could let hackers take advantage of personal medical devices dating back as far as 2008. And you're thinking, wow, why didn't I know this? Well, we knew it, so we decided to do something about it because we're trying to protect everybody. So in 2017, the FDA recalled 465,000 pacemakers due to cyber hacking fears. Hackers could reprogram 20 types of device with adjacent access, like within 50 feet. Low skill level, give me a hoodie. I live in my mother's basement and I know a little bit of something, and they could hack these devices. So I was keynoting an event last week. I said, oh, within 50 feet. Oh, so everybody in this room can hack your device. Do you trust all of them? You're walking through the mall, you're in an airport, and this is really a risk. In 2018, they announced a voluntary recall of a number of devices, and then another 80,000 insulin pumps were recalled in 2019, and there's more of this all the time. So all of this, as we say, Houston, we have a problem. So what we need to do is we must secure connected healthcare devices and data while enabling interoperability to get the benefits of all the insight while we're helping to protect the humans. So our top concerns, the way this started was, and I was in the Cisco IoT World Forum Steering Committee, and in 2015, I was at one of their meetings, and another gentleman from IEEE and I, Oleg Logvinov, he was from ST Micro. We were sitting in the back going, nobody's worrying about intent, trust, and security for all this stuff. Like nobody. Everybody's worrying about their device or their software or whatever, but it's all connected. So we said, okay, let's worry about it together. So we hosted a workshop in 2016 at Washington University in DC. And it was an end-to-end trust and security workshop. You could actually see the results and the report online at IEEE. And we came up with this TIPPSS framework. But while we were talking about it, we said, so where should we start? We said, well, connected healthcare devices, if you hack those, you can immediately kill a human. And as a matter of fact, I've been speaking about this for a number of years. And a gentleman reached out to me a few years ago and said, oh, wow, I saw your presentation at the Academic Medical Center, on hacking of medical devices. And I quote you in my book. I said, oh, I'm so honored. What's the name of your book? The Doctor Will Kill You Now. So sure, I was like, oh man, I don't think that's good. So sure enough, and he's an MD and an IEEE senior member. So he knows both sides of this. So he sent me a copy of the book and there was my reference. And the thing is that this could happen, right? So connected healthcare devices and data are our first priority. That's why this first TIPPSS standard is clinical IoT, data and device interoperability. Then connected hospitals, campuses, cities, and vehicles. That includes the electric grid, autonomous or connected vehicles, and then clinical, scientific, and research device and data integrity. You may know that during COVID, there was at least one large research institution that was hacked, their research data. And if you hack and change the research data, then all the downstream decisions made on that bad data could be bad. So all of this is so important. So protection is needed regarding device, hardware, software, and service hacks, physical health and safety risk, reduced financial risk and reputational harm for the companies, data theft, data integrity, loss of privacy, and we need what we call a defense in depth strategy at the hardware, firmware, software, and service level. And we need to evolve our policy and culture to expect this, and actually, I would say demand it. So actually, in 2015, when I was still at IBM, they had me in this KPMG article, which is still available online, believe it or not, even though it's the days of the dinosaur, everything goes so quickly now. And I said they're going to try to hack everything. And we have to design security right in at the beginning. And so that's actually still available online if you want to read it. So we created this TIPPSS idea out of the workshop we did in 2016. And so TIPPSS, we look at as the new cybersecurity paradigm. We think of it as an extension to the CIA triad. If you're a cybersecurity person, or if you're not, we'll teach you. So CIA is not the CIA, but it stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which is kind of like the cybersecurity code. Like if you're a cybersecurity person, you've been living with the CIA triad. What we look at now is TIPPSS. Now that devices are in humans and humans are in devices, there's another level of risk, physical risk, human risk. So we see this as like the next turn of the crank, building on CIA and going into the future. So trust is allowing only designated people and services to have device or data access, very connected to identity. If you deal with trust and identity, we call it IAM, identity and access management. You validate the identity of people, services, and things so you know if you can trust them. Privacy, ensuring device, personal, and sensitive data is kept private. Protection, protecting devices and users from harm, as we said, physical, digital, financial, and reputational. Safety, providing safety ongoing for devices, infrastructure, and people, and then maintaining security of all of them. And this is what TIPPSS is about. So this is when Liam and I got a chance to get really geeky together with a number of other people. And once we created this TIPPSS idea, Maria Palombini actually suggested with a few other of our IEEE friends that we do this industry connections project, and it was a pre-standards effort. And so we created this TIPPSS framework for clinical IoT data and device interoperability. And this was in the 2018-2019 timeframe. And as you could see, and actually it was at a meeting in Orlando where I met Maria, Liam, and we started talking about this.
And it's probably about, was that when about, I know that's when I learned that you said, as a little girl, I always looked for things about the whole UL thing. You got to tell that. That was good.
I do have to tell that, yeah. So the vision for this is that we want to create human demand for this as well. People say, how are you going to get it deployed? Like, we're going to teach the patients and the humans about this once we get the manufacturers and solution providers and providers, the hospitals and stuff doing it. So when I was a little girl, being a geek, I knew that that underwriters laboratories, that tag meant that a device was safer. So I used to crawl around looking for the UL tag on the electric cords and the different things in the house that were electrical. So my vision is that, or our vision is that in a couple of years, when this is fully deployed, this TIPPSS standard for clinical IoT, there'll be a little girl at the doctor with her grandmother, and a doctor will try to give one of them an insulin pump, and the little girl will look up at them and say, "Does it have TIPPSS?" That's what we envision, is that there'll be human pull for this. The same way you say, well, does it have a seatbelt when you get a car now? You didn't care. Like, you threw the puppies and the kids in the back of the station wagon, 50 years ago. But now it's different, right? You know that it can keep you safer. So it's that idea. And we created this technical view so that the technical people like all of y'all and us worry about all of these things. The UX, user experience, user interface, applications, integration layer, application programming interfaces, software development kits, DLT or blockchain, the connection layer, data ingestion management, and all these data sources and targets, which are changing all the time. And then up and down the right side in the green are the TIPPSS elements: security, encryption, federated identity management, key management, user management, authentication, privacy, compliance, all these different things. So we created this, and it's available in a report. And then after this happened, we were like, well, it sounds like we should have a working group. So we launched it was actually originally the P2733 working group. And then we
Mhm.
wanted to pull UL into this underwriters laboratories because of my little girl story. And so then we signed an MOU between IEEE and UL, and we've been developing this together. And if you might know that the UL 2900 series is their medical device series. So we agreed to change P2733 to P2933. And so now that this is a standard for IEEE and UL. It was approved by IEEE. We agreed to use the IEEE process, and then it was published simultaneously by IEEE on September 30th as 2933-2024 and by UL as 2933:2024 because that's their nomenclature. So it's a standard available through both IEEE and UL. So we created it to, establish the framework with TIPPSS principles for clinical IoT data and device validation and interoperability. It includes wearable clinical IoT and interoperability with healthcare systems, including EHRs, EMRs, other clinical IoT devices, in-hospital devices, and future devices in connected healthcare systems. And you think, how do you know what future devices and healthcare systems are going to be? It's like, well, a lot of us work in the healthcare industry. Look at Liam, he's from Medtronic. You'll see in our working group, our other vice chair is the Chief Information Security Officer at Indiana University Health, the whole hospital system. Our secretary is from Draeger, medical system. So we're in this. We have NIH people, we have all sorts of people. And so we have like we talked about this technology. What about augmented reality? What about ML? What about AI?
Mhm.
So we know some of the things that'll be coming, and we created the standard with an eye toward the future. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we have some clues. So we created the working group, and when you first create a working group at IEEE, they ask you how many people will be in active, and we said, well, 25 if we ask our best friends. And so then we had 250. So we had to multiply by 10 because when we tell people about it, if they know this space, they zoom in like laser beams. I'm in. Nobody else is worrying about this. I'm glad we are. And we've actually had 317 people sign up for it over the 4 or 5 years. So I chair it. I'm very lucky that this incredible team is part of it. And we actually have a couple of people on with us tonight. I saw Neil, and he is one of our subgroup leaders. And Kit, of course, was very involved as well. And there may be some others. We should have them put their names in the chat or speak up. And then Liam, thank God, is one of the co-vice chairs. And then Mitch Parker is at IU Health, and then Ken is from Draeger. And we created these, we said, so how are we going to manage 250 people? Oh boy, and come up with a standard around all these different aspects. So we said, well, maybe we should have subgroups. What do you think about that? And we voted on it as a team. And we agreed to do subgroups, and we named the subgroups. And so we had a trust and identity subgroup, privacy, protection and safety, security, data and device validation interoperability, integrated system design, including AIML, and Professor Neil, who's on the phone, was one of the co-leaders of that. And then use cases and scenarios, including human factors. So these are just sample use cases. So people could say, so what would this look like? How does this manifest? So that's the quick overview. Liam, do you want to say anything here before you go on to the next slide?
No, I love that. And as a matter of fact, to add to, and one reason I like your story about the little girl UL is we almost gave ourselves some marching orders before we talk about use cases. That was somebody comes to us and says, who cares? It wasn't meant to be cynical, but why should it matter to them? And then when you think of things like design thinking, critical thinking, human-centered design, these type of methods, you think about how I might empathize with my customer, my needs. And so here's Florence representing that customer. How do we make it something that means something to us? So before we develop our problem statements and whatnot. And so that led us to exactly what Florence is going to go to next with use cases. But it was really about how to give us a format to work off, a persona basically to project. And if you think about, I like that Einstein quote that says, if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough. So how are we going to make this relatable? You want to add anything further before I go on use cases?
Oh, no, I'm going to be quiet now. I always talk too much.
No worries. No, it was always a good. That's the thing. It's nice, like Florence was saying, is It didn't matter. You think about over 6 years of doing this, if somebody had to take a break, and I have to admit that probably not many did take a break. We did our account, and it was amazing to see how what's 50 something months or whatever. It's just amazing. But one of the biggest things was, how do we make this relatable? How do we, like Kit was talking to us earlier about having an implantable device. I have an implanted pain control device, effectively. And you start thinking, well, it communicates wirelessly. What am I trying to protect? We realized early on that a lot of people didn't consider cybersecurity needs until what we call the adoption phase, or maybe the integration phase. But we took a step back, and specifically when I think of Neil's group or some of the other groups, we started looking all the way down to the subcomponent, the subassemblies. Because if somebody could exploit a bad resistor or a bad subassembly, a Bluetooth module, then they've already opened the door for some way of breaking into it, a device effectively, or a system. So we needed something to ground us. And one of the things we level set on when we think about like Florence's background, mine, Mitch, and Ken, it was continuous glucose monitoring as an example. And when you think of continuous glucose monitoring, and you look at some of the recalls like Florence was talking about, you might have a small sensor that's on, just on the skin. It does a little subdermis, little probe basically, not to go into specifics of it, but it talks Bluetooth to the pump. Well, the pump then also has a vial that has to be controlled. And what if somebody got the wrong quantity, wrong amounts, programmed the device to administer too much insulin, as an example? Well, that device, that pump also talks to a handheld. Think of BYOD. Well, how do I secure almost an unknown device that might come out there? Then it gravitates further and you start saying, wait a minute, I've got to then talk to Medtronic, who's monitoring my device and doing updates. How do I secure that data is the correct data? It's been authenticated. How do I know that I should be receiving that? How are we controlling all this? So when we started looking at various ledger systems and other things, we said, we're not traditional blockchain. We're not traditional this. And then we really defined how unique we were in the TIPPSS when we looked at TIPPSS as an example. One of the other things, and as you saw relatively to what I said, the insulin delivery system was also neural. And we don't have it here on the list, but one of the things we characterized, as we said, for example, like a DBS device, deep brain stimulation, was here's a patient goes to the doctor's office. The doctor then uses the physician programmer and it says, okay, I'm going to make some changes to to the sensor that's helping control Parkinson's, for example. Well, he sends it up to the cloud. It gets massaged. It comes back down. Well, how do you know the cloud's secure? How do you know the transfer method is? How do you know the doctor's office is secure? How do you know the transmission to the device is secure? All those things had to be considered. So when we saw the system of systems, we started thinking about it. And then when you go to the hospital to home type of environment, you add more to it. You say, okay, I've got a pacemaker. I'm sleeping in bed. My device is talking while I'm sleeping and doing updates and checking my history of the use of pacing or defibrillation, example. And it's going to the home office. It's going to the monitoring stations. How do I know the network it's on is secure? How do I know all that? And what is interesting, it's not just always patient data. It could be intellectual property. What are the things you're trying to protect? And we even covered that in our TIPPSS standard, because that could be your market share as a company. So when you start saying to yourself, why should I care about TIPPSS? Why should this matter to me? These are the type of analogies that you can start thinking about, those personas. Why it is important to start thinking at an earlier phase. And when we think of integration, we think of multiple phases. We don't, like I said, not just think about adoption or integration. We think of the actual conception. You think of the decision-making phases. You think of the design, the development. You think of the testing, validation, release. Then you go into sustaining and even end of life or decommissioning. So you have to think more than just that narrow myopic portion around adoption and integration, because it has to integrate with other systems. So when you start thinking, as we move into the hospital or home type scenarios, is think about all of us having our own systems. With COVID, we all moved everything home. I've got even portable ultrasound in my house, but it's guaranteed I have backup systems to the other systems, but we do that now. So how do we really know that it's giving us the right data, it's not being, compromised, that it's even accidentally by a system that's, radiating signal that might be saturating the system you need for communication. So I hope that kind of gives an example. I'm using my hands under the table here, kind of as Florence and I say, the Italian mode comes out. But in either case, this drives it home why it's important to you that you need to consider TIPPSS and what we had to say in that standard.
Absolutely. That was great. Thank you so much. You're so
Thank you.
Well, we're so lucky to have you on this team. So now Liam's going to take us through quickly some of these use cases, and then we're going to take you a little deeper into what's in the standard.
Okay, so in this case here, and this is what I wanted you guys to think about, is so you heard me kind of describe, the portion of a person has a device. And if you start thinking about not just how it's set up as a static scenario, think about somebody's swimming as an example, somebody's running, like we have Caroline down there. When these devices are going, when these devices are monitoring, whatever frequency you've got them set to actually I like the example. I think of a child who really doesn't know much about their device, and a parent's got to be using his iWatch to look and see if his child's insulin levels are correct. Is it monitoring appropriately glucose? Does the sensor have to be moved? So when you start thinking of that, and you see the sensor and you see the phone, it might be transmitting from a wearable the kid's got to the parent to the monitoring station. It might be going cellular, which we're capable of doing. So we think the internet connection there. And not only is it going to, we'll say, the mobile device manager server as an example, but even the human. And so we thought of it beyond just saying the patient, the payer, the healthcare provider, but the caregiver. There's the father or mother who's monitoring the child. And so when we look at those areas, we started thinking, again, it's not always somebody compromising, somebody trying to get your data. Think of a denial of service. Somebody could be simply blocking your capability to function. So when we looked at all the different methods, like we say Bluetooth Low Energy as an example, or NFC as an example, we look at those methods, and like Florence has said, we start future-proofing it. And one of the things when I think about future-proofing, as we said in one of the books we did, is what's going to be the future, and this is one of the ones Neil was on, he can add to, is what will be the future? Well, instead of looking at platforms outside the body, start thinking of the body as the platform. So we've even created solutions that are setting up sensing along neural pathways. And you think, well, wait a minute, what could be compromised if that's the method of communication? So it kind of gives you a better feel what we're thinking. Go ahead, Florence.
That was perfect. So I think I'm going to take us through the use cases and get you to the tripods so you can go a little deeper with them.
Perfect. Sounds good.
That sounds great. So this is sample use case one, the continuous glucose monitor. One of the reasons we chose the insulin pump is because, and the continuous glucose monitor is because a lot of people know about diabetes. It's not, like this esoteric thing that you really have to be an MD to understand it. And actually, when we think of underserved communities, there are a lot of diabetic challenges. So we want everyone to know that this standard is good for everybody. So then we have the automated insulin delivery system, a similar connection here with the insulin pump, and then the endocrinologist might be looking at the information, the family might be looking for the information, and we have the user view and the technical view, because the users have to be able to use it, and then the technical view is how you actually implement it. Same thing with home to hospital. Poor Jan, has all these devices at home. This is a hospital at home, I mean, and then we have these different elements of hospital at home. And when we started this, there were a couple things we said is, a lot of people have told us nobody's worried about this whole thing together before. So we said, okay, if you want to create a new concept or a new term, go for it. So there were a couple that came out of it. One of them was tripod. And it's that we have the people, organization, and device, the kind of like a triumvirate. And then you'll hear about another one called squirt, which we'll get to. But do you want to say a little bit about these three slides, Liam?
No, I think you covered it very well, actually. So in symbology, it really gives a feel for it. Obviously, we know that it was continuously grow and upgrade. So when we think of 4G, 5G, and whatnot, we're thinking further into the future. So there's a lot of other methods that we didn't want to pile in. We didn't want to, boil the ocean, we said. So you'll see more of that coming forward.
Exactly. So this is the trust and identity interactions of the people, and you can see the patient onboarding, caregiver onboarding, healthcare practitioner onboarding with the manufacturer. We have registries, we have patient and caregiver identity, authentication. So all the things that you have to worry about, or the technical team does. Then you have the O in tripod, the organizations, and you can see the organizational situation with manufacturers and the hospitals. And then we have the devices and the things, and there's a whole lot of stuff here because there are a lot of devices and things. And all of this is in the standard, so we're not going to have time to do every little detail, but we wanted you to see the depth that's in it. And then the fourth sample use case we had was home to hospital, where, poor Jan, well, now it's Pauline, and she's taking her her devices, to the hospital and then connecting, locally, so the clinician can see what's going on. So then what we did is, and Liam, I think you would be better at this than I, but you let me know. We actually have some of the specifics of each of the TIPPSS elements. And we put trust and identity together. And it was interesting because when we started this, some people said they should be separate. And actually, that's not the way identity and access management works. And that's what we're trying to teach everybody, is that these go together. You have to validate the identity of the human, the device, or the service to decide if you're going to trust it or not. And that's what we built into the standard. So do you want to go through these, or do you want me
Well,
to?
I'll let you go through this, but I like to emphasize the fact that what you just said, as we work, and we're working right now on the maturity model, which is going to help everybody, who's looking to adopt this standard, to understand, am I compliant? Am I just starting out? Am I fully compliant or whatnot? Is the emphasis, like Florence has said, about device. Obviously you can think of operational level and whatnot, but in this case here, we are specifically focusing on the device. But you got to understand it, when we think device, we don't always think of the physical hardware aspect. It could be, and we often said, the human, the software, and the hardware. So this gives a great example. And in one of the first slides Florence showed, it really gave a nice definition of TIPPSS and why those all work together.
Exactly. And it could be hardware or software as a medical device, right? So from the trust and identity perspective, we start all the way at device development and manufacturing, design lifecycle and management, inter-device and cross-system trust, interactions between environments, like we showed home to hospital, decentralized environments like Farmer Jones, I think we called them at one point. We were talking about with something's in the field, or they could be, an area conflict, device to human interaction with support technicians, clinical operators, patients, caregivers. These are humans that interact with this stuff. And we embrace a zero trust architecture approach at the macro level as well as the micro level.
And
Also,
one thing I would just add to that, if you don't mind, is I like on that portion is, again, don't always think about it as vulnerabilities in the sense of purposeful hacking. We know that there's a lot of things that be exploited, but as an example, I'll refer back to like Kit and others on my devices. We couldn't even be anywhere near a T3 as an example, MRI. So you start thinking of things that might put us at risk, or even the technicians, other individuals. So we need to move beyond just the obviousness of somebody trying to hack or disrupt purposefully, but these accidental things going through a TSA check, as an example.
absolutely. Or like connectivity is broken for some reason. And
Exactly.
the patient can't get to their device, or the provider can't get to the information about the device. So all of these are potential risks. As Liam said, it doesn't
Exactly.
be malicious. It could just be life, like, this hurricane right now. We also have, I've had a number of people when I talk about this ask me these specific questions. So we have this slide too. So we have the macro view and the micro view. The macro view includes user managed software, the trust and identity, or T&I layers, as we like to call it, identity, authentication, context, authorization, auditing, and accounting. And then the onboarding process, practices and processes, device identities, secret material protection, system management, tokens, and deprovisioning. Because we also think about, if these devices are going to be deprovisioned and decommissioned, wiping the data off the device and then making it capable to be deployed maybe in an underserved community or in another continent around the planet. And there are companies that actually will do that for these devices so that they actually can be used for good. So even though this is a technical standard, we have all of this, like, in my job at the Northeast Big Data Hub, we talk about data science for social good. So this is technology for social good, and for public health. And then the micro view includes discrete components, subassemblies, device software, the finished product, device registry, and decommissioning. And we spent quite a bit of time on the decommissioning and deprovisioning, as I recall, Liam. There's a lot to,
Exactly.
yeah. From a privacy perspective, we had someone from the EU, but then Brexit happened, so now she's from the UK. But she led that, because as we know, they have GDPR and they've been very focused on privacy. And as you know, privacy is the governance is jurisdictional. So depending on what country you're in, like, Liam worked for Medtronic. Medtronic is headquartered, I think, in Ireland, right? But they do
Correct.
business all over the planet. So you have to worry about these issues in every country. What are the privacy provisions and what is the governance? So we say that there are 6 interrelated key elements: data protection frameworks from around the world, a privacy by design methodology throughout the design and operational life cycles, the data life cycle, creating a privacy impact assessment, adaptive privacy solutions, and understanding the context of the data and the privacy considerations. So all of this is part of the privacy view.
And Florence, if you don't mind, I'll quickly interject from one of the text messages I think Malcolm sent. And you've heard us all talking about, the type of level, the types of security, the accidental, the purposeful, and Malcolm had asked about TIPPSS level of protection. And one thing that we did always keep in mind when working on TIPPSS was, we think of the most secure system as a system you can't use. It has no inputs or outputs. And we know that's not practical. So we know that we're not shooting for 100%. When we think of Six Sigma or think of manufacturing, we know we can't really hit that. But if we're trying our best to do not just being compliant with some government regulation, if we're really trying to do our best, we know we're going to, by today's standards, accomplish most of our goals in a high percentage. We're not thinking, how are we going to really defeat this quantum computer that's running a 5,000 qubit quantum computer, whatever it is, the current. But the point is, we're doing our due diligence now with a very practical sense on what we can actually secure.
Absolutely. And what we need to keep private and how. And the policies are going to evolve, as we know. From the protection perspective, protecting the device, data, environment, and users from harm. Supporting functional features, including authentication, access control, secure and trusted pairing, secure communication, end-to-end encryption, updates, tamper-proofing, resilience and fail-safe, event detection, backup and restore, and once again, decommissioning. And I have to say, we're so fortunate, right, Liam? We have experts in all these areas who came together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so good because we learned from each other, we listened to each other. It was a very diverse and collaborative community. For people who are familiar with the IEEE processes, it's individual and not entity-based, working group, so that anyone, as I say, who cares, that wants to help can join. And that's what we did. And so we had people who were experts in all these different areas, which was wonderful.
It was actually, we joked earlier about how many months we did, but those were the official meetings. If you looked at the sub-team meetings and all the other things that were going on, it, like we said, it led to books and things. So it's probably 4 times the amount that's been recorded.
Probably, I agree with you. From a safety perspective, we had a gentleman that works at Washington, and I think he worked with the Children's Hospital at Washington University in St. Louis that helped us with the safety part. So maintaining device and system safety, effectiveness, reliability, and security with consideration of direct and indirect patient safety impacts. This is what we're saying a little about: disruption of clinical data flows, disruption of patient engagement, inability to use clinical devices, addressing risk due to regulatory constraints and unavailable of supporting systems, central monitoring, interpretation, analysis, prescription, electricity, and operational impacts that can compromise safety, environmental disruption, workflow and business disruption, loss of sensitive data or intellectual property, and compromise of user or network credentials. And all of these could negatively impact the outcomes. And so we care about all of this. So we actually look at the standard as a technical and process standard. Then we have the security view, and here we have pre-market and post-market. We have device-related and interoperability-related, and there's a lot of content in here, but one thing I'll mention is that under communicating securely, we have the CIA we had talked about before: confidentiality, integrity, and availability of sensitive data. And protecting data in transit, so data at rest and data in motion, as some people say, as well as the secure development. Should I mute that person?
Mute yourself.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then maintaining a security baseline and communicating effectively about security with documentation and updates so that people understand what's going on. Then this is one of the terms we created, since we gave them, the liberty to create new words and terms. And this is, we had a team and on the integrated systems design team. And actually, Neil, I don't know if you want to say anything, but they created an example reference architecture. And these are all examples, because the way we see this, I say, if you want to do TIPPSS, and we're talking about bringing TIPPSS across all domains. There's actually a young lady who runs a nonprofit from my alma mater who said, we do surveys of individuals and I want to deploy TIPPSS. I want to be TIPPSS compliant. I said, whoa. She said, yeah, well, the humans that we work with want to make sure I'm pardon me, we're maintaining trust and identity and privacy and protection and safety and security of their data. Very interesting. But in this perspective, they created SQUIRT, the Services Quality and Integration Reconciliation of TIPPSS layer, which takes into consideration context, technology, application services, the healthcare workflow services and end user services, along with the information architecture and governance and policy layers. So the way I see it is if I were, a CISO in a hospital, I would look at this picture like it has all white in it, which means you can fill it in with what's important to you and say, what does this look like for us? What is it that we need to do? Where are the attack vectors? Where are all these different systems? How can we get these to work together in a safe way, leveraging TIPPSS? And so that's kind of what the standard is about. So we started this journey 2015 at the back of the room at a Cisco IoT Wolfram Steering Committee. We did a workshop in 2016 in DC. We did the pre-standards work you saw with that very detailed framework in 2018, 2019. Then we started the working group in 2019. We went through a very long process through COVID. A lot of people had, life going on and unfortunately the other things too during COVID, and we got through it as a team. And then it was approved, the standard, by the IEEE board in June of 2024, and then just published on September 30th. And this is the way IEEE standards go. You initiate the project like we did in 2015, 2016, then the pre-standards, then get the working group going. So that's mobilizing the working group in 2019, drafting the standard, balloting the standard, which means that it's voted on, gaining final approval, and then maintaining it, which is where we are now, but we're not stopping. So our plan, and we're very humbled, and maybe shocked that we're a recipient of the 2024 IEEE Engineering Emerging Technology Award from IEEE SA.
It's just
And
amazing, icing on the cake.
it really is. And we have to thank Kit. Kit actually put the nomination in. So thank you, Kit, and everybody that's been part of this. We're very excited. And we want to plan more tips. We presented this to NIST almost 2 years ago now. And at the time, they asked if we could take tips across all the cyber physical systems. And many of you probably know what that is, but cyber physical means it's like IT and OT together. Some people say information technology and operational technology. So there's some type of information layer and there's a physical thing. So all the cyber physical systems, you may have heard about the water system that was hacked recently. That's an example of a cyber physical system. Energy systems that have been hacked, the energy grid. So, and keeping it safe. So we plan on bringing it across as many domains as we can. And we're actually putting forward a motion. I don't know if I told you this, Liam, but on this Friday at the Engineering and Medicine Biology Society standards technical committee thing that Ken Fuchs and I are on, the secretary, we're bringing forward a motion to create a task group under 2933 to create the future roadmap for TIPPSS.
Love it.
So that will help us bring TIPPSS to other clinical IoT subdomains like biomedical digital twins, which I'm working on with NIH and CI and some others, and the Department of Energy, remote subject monitoring, which Maria Palombini wants us to focus on, and then other areas like the energy grid or others, and our maturity model, Liam. So that can be under that task group idea too. That's our idea.
And I think that's a great example because I'll use an example here where when we were talking about device manufacturing, that made perfectly good sense. Devices all the way with the patient. But a lot of people didn't realize that when you're manufacturing a product, it's very similar, when I look at, what happens in the hospital systems, and people are like, well, wait a minute, I don't see the analogy of how it works, but we think about a surgical procedure, a product, consumables, reusable, traceability, supply chain, everything. So you start to see how this has the analogies work in so many other industries.
Absolutely. And that's what we look forward to working on together. So what we want is, like we had experts in clinical IoT, like, Liam from Medtronic and Ken from Draeger and, Mitch at the IU Health System and people from Cerner and the NIH and all these other organizations. We would like experts like that in the other domains to make sure we're looking at it the right way. So like we've been talking about this in energy grid, they're the PMUs, the phaser multiplexer units or the synchrophaser units, which are really locked down. You don't want to mess that up, so it's secure. But now we have all these distributed energy resources connecting to that stuff. Whoa, once again, now we have all these devices and all these attack vectors. So we're looking for experts in each of the areas to work with us. If you're interested, let us know. Earlier this year, we were really excited to find out after the fact that IEEE Standards Association publishes this Beyond Standards report. And for this year, in March of 2024, they talked about the 4 foundational technology trends to watch in 2024. And one of them was TIPPSS. We were so excited. So building trust with data governance as the world becomes increasingly more digital and by extension connected, an emphasis will continue to be placed on universal human values, including trust, identity, privacy, protection, safety, and security. And that's how we see it too. So we're delighted to have IEEE support on this. There are many publications you can read. There are other books. I have to put the other books on here, the Taylor and Francis stuff. I don't have their pictures on here.
I know we've got like so many books from this. Yeah.
I have to add them. We have to add them. So you saw that KPMG report in the middle of the presentation. That's still available, Security in the IoT Ecosystem. The good news and the bad news is it's still the same problem, and that was in 2015. So that's why we have to do something about it. There was a Smart Cities book where a gentleman Mark Cather, who is now the Chief Security and Privacy Officer for the University of Maryland system, he and I wrote a chapter on tips for smart cities in that. We have a couple of IEEE articles, Enabling Trust and Security Tips for IoT, Wearables and Medical Interoperability, The Evolving Frontier, and then there are a couple of Springer books where actually I brought 16 women authors with me in each book to prove women can do engineering and science. So some people are still trying to figure that out. So we have Women Securing the Future with Tips for IoT, and then with Tips for Connected Healthcare. So that's what we wanted to share with you. We feel so honored to be part of this whole event. Thank you so much for asking us, Kit. I feel very honored to be part of a working group that was just amazing and attracted so many great people who really applied themselves, especially people like William and our other leadership team, including some people that are on the phone here or on the webinar with us. So thank you for having us, and we'd be happy to take questions.
And I have to add that when Kit came knocking, we said, yep, you had us at a vote.
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to remind everybody of this fall series and a sponsorship with IEEE Computer Society and IEEE ComSoc, and funded and founded by Computer and Communications Joint Society Northwest Florida, IEEE Northwest Florida section. I'm going to take that down now. And now we can have a lively discussion among the guests.
Yeah.
The chat window has been very lively, so I know
Yeah.
that people have a lot to say.
Kit, we do have a few questions.
Excellent.
So I guess the first question that we have is coming from Malcolm. And he's talking in terms of the radiations with the TIPPSS program. I'm assuming that's the Canadian TIPPSS program. TIPPSS, for people who are not aware of, is telecommunications, electronic, materials protected from emulating spurious, I think it's transmission or technology. So, so the question is related to that. And his question is that the security of data had mention of a radiated emission from a device. This is possible, but regular EMC radiated emissions compliance is likely enough to work. The environment is very noisy now and not an isolated device. Yes, TIPPSS program for intelligence history exists to monitor devices, but it's not common to most people. If you are really concerned and of interest, your device will be attacked. Is it really a concern, or are you trying to suggest a TIPPSS level protection on the devices? It's not simple or small, low cost, and common.
And Raj, if you don't mind me interjecting, that was actually the question we were answering earlier about, when we were talking initially about, can you achieve 100%, protection and whatnot? But if we want to expand on that, we can.
The reason, William, sorry, Stan, just a minute. The reason I asked the question again is because I noticed there were about 10 or 11 people join after you answered the question. So I wanted it to be more, a bit more, so you can talk about also the certain things about cost. I believe in 2933, we have covered a part of it in the governance section. So if you could please elaborate a bit, appreciate it. Thanks.
Florence, you want to take a swag, or should I go again?
You should go again. Thank you.
Okay. So what we were saying earlier is that we approach this from a very practical standpoint. And we use the example that the most secure system is a system you can't use. It has no inputs and outputs. It's a black box. So we're very practical, just like when we think about Six Sigma compliance and other aspects, that we try to achieve a high degree of security, a high degree of success. But we were very practical in realizing that we weren't going to be 100%, that we've done our due diligence, to be compliant, but it also with a future forward type of perspective that as we, when we started this, 5G wasn't really that much well known, but we started incorporating just same thing when we think of quantum computing. We can only protect so much, we can't be 100%. So when we think about a TIPPSS approved or, that type of a level, we were doing our best, but we accepted the fact that we'd never be 100%.
And that's really a
Thanks,
reality.
William.
Yeah.
Florence?
Yeah, and that's really a reality over time too. And what we talk about with William is leading the maturity model work now. We want to create a maturity model for TIPPSS. At the same time, we're going to be speaking with IEEE and UL about like the ICAP program, the conformity assessment program, because the National Cancer Institute actually asked me when I presented this recently at a biomedical digital twin discussion, because we plan on bringing TIPPSS into biomedical digital twins. Like I said, all that data, oh my gosh, we have to protect it. And they said, are you going to be able to, to validate the devices, that they conform to TIPPSS? And so we're going to be working with IEEE and UL to see how we can get that process done. And that'll be a very important part of this. But as we, go into the maturity model, we're thinking about all these different elements. And we said, well, you'll never be completely TIPPSS compliant because the questions are going to change. There'll be new attack vectors and there are going to be new devices and then when there's augmented reality, there's going to be a hacker that shows up in a hoodie, like right in your whatever, right? And all of a sudden they're like dancing on your insulin pump, right?
Yes, that's true.
But we don't know what's going to be coming, right? And so it will probably never be over. Like cyber, yeah, I know. Look at you. They're dancing on Stan right now.
So Stan has a question, if that's okay with everyone.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Just go
I
ahead,
have a
Stan.
question and some comment. First of all, the TIPPSS program is a very old program, and probably 40, 50 years old, and it's a DoD. And when it comes to security and so forth, I use an old adage that says that locks are meant to keep honest people out.
Well, Stan, I like what you said because, Florence and I both working in missile technology, and, that's why I actually use the term TIPPSS approved versus other things, because, you think about those computers where we dropped down the power resolution of the monitor and you had 300 screws around the chassis. So yeah, it was meant to keep honest people out pretty much.
I had worked with the Army and with NSA on security systems for nuclear weapons.
Exactly.
And same thing as measures and countermeasures, things of that sort. And countermeasures, you can't completely countermeasure anything. So what you do is you make it more expensive and more difficult to do. But you can't stop it. You can't keep anyone out. If you can get in, someone else can get in too.
Yeah.
Have to keep running away from the bear. Yeah.
So, and that's about the best you can do. A lot of the stuff that you talked about, I think what you've done, which is very good, is you kind of formalized it, the process, okay, and looked at all the different aspects of it, of product development, and also keep in mind that technology is still constantly changing. A lot of the things you talked about, I did. In fact, I had programs back in back in the 70s. Okay.
Yeah.
For example, IoT. I have started a course in 1977. I think it's still on the books, although it's changed because I haven't taught it many years. That basically was IoT, except it wasn't called that.
Yeah, we didn't have the terms yet.
Well, a lot of things that we've been doing for many, many years, like AI. We've been doing AI probably, I think, since World War II.
Yeah, and then it was deep
Prior to that, of
learning.
course, we didn't have
Right.
computers. So we
Yeah,
couldn't-
you're
Well, and
absolutely
I like what you said there, Stan, is because when you think of AI, we also try to take a practical sense when looking at things. You hear people use big data. We think of AI and we say, is it reactive? Is it situational? Is it associated? So we're very practical. Even when Florence said, augmented reality, we want to use all the chart. We listed extended reality, which is an encapsulation of mixed reality, augmented, and virtual reality. So we really did take a consideration of this.
Yeah. Now, Florence, we have a similar background.
Oh, wow.
Okay. I have my bachelor's degree was in aeronautical engineering. Okay. And I went to the Guggenheim School. I think Princeton had one also, and Caltech was the other Guggenheim School. And then I went to Cornell, where I got more into aerospace engineering. And then when I got my doctorate, I guess it was in aeronautical engineering, but I had pretty much enough, certainly in terms of coursework and maybe my thesis, to get a degree in physics or mathematics.
That's wonderful.
then-
Well, you have
You're
a
one
very
of us.
nice background. Yeah, you should talk on one of these things. You have a real career in technology for a really long time. We actually do have a lot of similarities. I think that's very cool. And, we call AI, it was like artificial intelligence, it was deep learning, it was deep QA. Then I worked on the Watson strategy at IBM. Now AI is all over the place, so we've watched it evolve, right, Stan? And even like IoT, we have these cute little sensors. But what's different now, there are a number of things. There's a lot more connectivity to a lot more, things, but also there is still cute little things, but they're a lot smarter and they have a lot more storage now. There's more storage, there's more compute capacity, and it
Well,
really
that's
changes the whole paradigm.
that's the key, and that's been used to justify new programs, and to actually repeat and improve on what's been done before. But the technology is changing. Whether it's leveling off or not, I'm not going to say. But I think Moore's law is kind
Exactly.
of
Yeah, now there's a qubit law. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
So,
but Stan, there are a couple of things. When you go back, I'm just going to go 3 decades back. When you look at the systems in, say, late 80s and early 90s, let's just say they were optimized for resources. So the cost of optimization or cost of developing or cost of operations were resource oriented.
Yeah.
Now, when you look at any devices or anything that we have worked in since, say, 2002, 2003, they are not optimized for resources or for anything related to resources, whether it's at the development level or at operations level. They are more, when you look at it, they are not designed for resource optimization from a cost perspective. So here sorry, I'll just finish the statement. Like James Gosselin mentioned, the virtual machines are the problem. So where the virtual machine abstracts your hardware from anything software, so you don't have any limits on the resources, so everything is infinite. So you assume you have infinite resources. Therein lies the fallacy in what, when we talk between what has happened, even when we look at what Fred Brooks talked about in the Mythical Man Month, and today, therein lies the problem. The optimization or the cost functions are different today compared to what it was before.
well, I look more at what was done before, was more proof of principle
Okay.
than anything else. Okay, so you really didn't care about all the details that we just saw today. First, you want to demonstrate that it works, that you have something that can work, and then you go ahead and improve it, and then you go through a continuous development process as technology improves.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, Stan, one thing I like what you just said is we didn't really realize, and I'll use Medtronic as an example of this whole issue of connectivity. And it was like Raj was even saying in the early 2000s, When you think of our manufacturing system, it was all carrier based, paper travelers, everything. There was no connection. You could design a single system and not worry about signal degradation or transmissions. But then when you started your supply chains, your MESs, your control systems, then when you started thinking at that level, you realize it wasn't even at the device, it's at the manufacturing, the subassembly, like the example. So like you said, it evolved.
That's right. I mean, you want to make sure you always go through this with the with your product development process to make sure you manufacture it. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, and actually,
and that's why I like the reference about system engineering they said in the chat. Sorry, go ahead, Florence.
Yeah, I want to spend more time on that, but let me say one thing, and then I'd love you to go into that a little bit more. And I was reading the chat before. So I've been presenting this at HIMSS for a few years now, with the Healthcare Information Management Systems Society, and I keynoted the cybersecurity conference there one time, and there was a guy from CISA there, CISA, however you want to say it, and I said, okay, so what do you want to say about TIPPSS? He said, just make sure the SBOM is in it. The software bill of materials. And I'm a mechanical and aerospace engineer, so I like things you can touch, so I'm used to the hardware side of things, but I'm a software, everyone's a software person now. But so we used to think of the bill of materials, from the manufacturing perspective, but the SBOM is so critical now, and it has more attack vectors because you don't have to be able to physically get to the thing. You can just download and do firmware over the air updates and fun stuff I put in there. Every time I'm getting an update, I'm like holding onto my laptop, like, or my phone or my watch or whatever it is, because you don't know what's going to come flying in. So, so the SBOM is in there as well too, because we wanted to make sure it was, just to say.
Well, you're right. If you think of data dictionaries, data catalogs, all those aspects.
Right.
Well,
And the thing that I noticed now that I never noticed so much before is that everyone is having the problem with the updates at the same time. Like, so you may be having a problem with the, but then you notice the person you're trying to reach, or the person who's got a deadline with you or whatever, from another company, from another place, whatever, they're having the same problem. And so there's, these connected problems that we have materialize on many desks at the same time.
Well, that is such a wonderful point, Kit, because Visualize Medtronic at 90,000 employees, and everybody's got an iPhone, and we're pushing out the update regardless of time to all 90,000 employees. We're shutting down. We are our own, pretty much a denial service.
Right.
It's here that I think one fundamental difference, I think, William, you brought it out during our discussions with Stan, compared to what it was before and today, that connectivity. I just want to emphasize 3 points, mainly because I come from telecom. One, that connectivity is not stable enough. Yes, we have advanced, we may have 5G, but we still have a capacity problem. So the massive machine communications is a problem still. Second, connectivity enables communication. They are two different things, connectivity and communications. And when you look at the standard, the 2933 or a couple others, the emphasis is not exactly on connectivity or communications, but on the holistic aspect of what the workflow is. So therefore, depending on who your organization is, what your organization prioritizes, you can therefore prioritize the focus of the workflow, what the threat model would be, work from the threat model, then identify your tips. This is a significant difference to when you say work with 27001 or few other, even NIST cybersecurity framework, because you're not coming from a controls perspective, which is the norm, but we are coming actually from the workflow perspective, which should be the norm. So that's a fundamental difference. And therefore, your governance is more from the workflow. And therefore, connectivity and communications, when we talk about it, will be a detail rather than a control.
It's just a good point to emphasize. I like you emphasizing specifically when we think of interoperability. A lot of people still, they only think I'm designing this system now. And oh yeah, it'll do this, but you're connecting it to another system that's 2 years old. Another system could be 10 years old. And
Mhm.
we think of the vulnerabilities. It's almost reminds me of the days where you want to hack a system, you go through the fax machine or the
Yes.
printer, and people like, well, they never secured those things. So you're
Exactly.
100% right when you think of the interoperability, the data transformation, even the accidental, we think going from an octal machine to a hex, you know, these types of things can mess up data. So we really have to think at a deeper level.
Exactly. And this is one thing that was pointed out here, not just in the health sector, but one of the unique things being in the telecom sector is we connect multiple sectors together. Two things, one from the space and avionics sector, and from the manufacturing sector we got in the IoT roundtable we had in Austin 2020, last year, 2023, was that the interoperability, and you were talking about SBOM, Florence, is where all of this care comes down, boils down to very insecure pieces. The SBOM is probably the one that will be extremely dynamic compared to the hardware ones, because hardware, you can have it like, static for a period or a release, not so for software. Software is both malleable and ductile. And therein we have a problem. Particularly, I hate JavaScript. Man, it was, sorry, I know I'm coming out very strong here, but if there's one thing we can go back in time to 95, when Netscape created JavaScript, no relation to Java, and destroy it, I would actually do that.
Okay, so we're trying to
Sorry.
be polite. We're trying to be polite. We don't.
Yeah, but you know, technologists can get very emotional.
Yeah, in the standard in particular, when we
Right.
talk about like, the
Yeah.
capabilities.
Exactly.
Yeah,
No, like
companies.
really, because
Yeah.
the IP of the design of the chip, we're like, we didn't say trust zone, we didn't say Edison, we
Mhm.
didn't say
Mhm.
intent. We're just saying this function is needed, and you pick your favorite.
Exactly.
But we try not to say what our favorites aren't.
But-
Two more things I'd like to if William can talk a little bit about the MBSE, I think Neil had to leave. But do you want to explain that a little bit, the model-based system engineering?
Well, what we were actually, and one of the things I know Neil teaches this also, and one of the things I teach in systems engineering or systems analysis is things, and you saw me hinting at things like data dictionaries, data catalogs. We think of design models effectively, and it even starts to think about when you think of models, and when we think of in any general sense of anything for systems engineering, is we want to look for an interesting analogy. Is think of convolutional neural networks. Think about the use of how we're actually not necessarily examining the data, not exposing things, but examining more the model, in order to make determinations and learning systems effectively. So when we think of software development life cycles, we mentioned some of those aspects of, when we think concept design all the way to decommissioning. When we think of the model-based engineering, it was really it really comes back to, and I was trying to kind of get off on different tangents about trying to protect the concepts even of what we're trying to do. So it may not answer because it's really a loaded question, but I'm trying to kind of keep it very simplified.
Just so people can be exposed to it. So that's really good. One other thing I want to mention about the maturity model work that Liam is leading is that I've had people say, like when I present this in different places, I can't like replace everything I have to be TIPPSS compliant. So how do I get there, right? So that's one of the things we're thinking about with the maturity model is we want to be able to give them comfort that they can get started now, and then what are the steps that they can take to get there? So that's one of the things we're going to figure out how to head into.
Yep, we're getting there.
And to sort of establish expectations that way,
Exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
we don't
But
want them
it's
to
a
say,
learning thing. Go ahead,
I can't
Florence.
do it. I have all old stuff. So, there's what they say is brownfield and greenfield stuff that's already it's going to be new. And so we do want them to start on this journey. We want to inspire them to get started so that
Right.
they continually have a higher level of TIPPSS. And then eventually, they'll never get all the way, to the rainbow, eat the leprechaun, because whoever does,
The pot of gold's there.
yeah, the pot of gold's there, because the questions, as
They
they
change.
What,
They change. Like
and
all
what
of
you
a sudden,
actually Go ahead, kid. Sorry.
We used
I'm
to
sorry.
teach
Oh,
this,
well, Stan, okay.
in the 70s.
Yeah.
In fact, the freshman, and it was called the Introduction to Engineering Design. And basically, what was that? If you look at it, a systems engineering course, but where we took all the modules separately and put them together at the end. And this is for freshmen.
Right. And things always ran in a call flow, like in the
Yeah.
telecom industry. So they started at the beginning and they went this way, right? And then suddenly there were Macs and people were going around and there was hypertext and hypercard, right?
But then it
And
also
we're
went to,
facing-
like Stan said, about object-oriented coding almost was an evolution
Exactly.
from his part. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So
I want
we're at that threshold again. We're at that precipice, right? We're really launching into a totally dynamic space now.
But you have to be
And-
careful. When you
yeah.
set up a procedure, when you set up all those steps, you may be stifling initiative. So there may be people out there who have good ideas and they don't want to go through all this.
It's a good point, Stan. Yeah.
good point. Yeah, this talk of this telecom that Kit brought reminds me of something else. Particularly when we talk about IoT or when we talk about any kind of medical devices. I know, Kit, we were talking about pacemakers the other day. Is the concept of segregating the data space and the control space. If we wind back to the 80s, around 84, 85, I think, telecom, we sent both the control signals, the data signals, and the management signals on the same logical channel. So what happened is people would take advantage of it and use whistling. You know, they would whistle the control signals,
I
and
remember doing
therefore,
that.
right. So
Then they had
that's
then they created the signaling channel and
exactly
all
that's
that.
called the
Well, if
signal
you
system
whistled
7.
the carrier frequency, enough
Exactly.
noise would interject on top
Right.
of the data frequency, and then you would actually
Exactly.
activate the devices.
So I think
Yes.
we're going to
So-
lose some people who don't talk like this. So I think if you guys want to have your own little like room, I think that would be fine. But maybe we should open it up to see
Well,
if any.
one
Yeah.
thing, Florence, also to take us back to, if you don't mind, is one of the things is in addressing back on our maturity model thing we just mentioned earlier, is we know, they said, you know, we had this little philosophy, it's like, tell me everything I didn't think about. Well, that's impossible. So when we think of the maturity model, we know there's going to be use cases or scenarios we don't understand fully. But as the people who worked on this for 6 or so years, getting longer for Florence to get it to where it is now, we want to work with teams, you know, to help us see if, you know, how we fit properly, how we can really make sure this maturity model works for as many people as possible. So if we're hitting the 75%, we try to do that, but then also work out some of those smaller nuanced industries or other use cases. So we
Well, the
encourage
other
that type
thing
of
about
communication.
that, William, is that
Mhm.
people have a different vocabulary. We've discovered that
Exactly.
just in this call. You know, that
Yeah.
people's vocabulary from their industry, sometimes we have to get with them and see how does their vocabulary overlap onto Florence's lovely chart, which is the white space chart, right?
Mhm.
So their vocabulary may be just slightly different,
Great
orthogonal.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then they fit, you know, as soon as we're
exactly.
able to interpret that.
Yeah, and we'll learn from that. That's why we were so blessed. We were so lucky that we had people from, you know, like 300 people that, you know, jumped into the, you know, into the moat or whatever, into the pool with us. We were nice and clean. Yeah.
Yes.
And we were so lucky because we had so many different perspectives and we have like, I don't know, 20 or 30 countries, 6 continents. And that's so valuable because we really wanted to create something that everybody thought was going to be useful,
Sure.
right?
Hmm.
So we were
Yeah.
very lucky. We had all those perspectives and we want to do the same now as we're rolling it out and we're communicating it. We want people to try it and tell us what they learned. Like this works, that doesn't
Exactly.
work. I see it like this. Or even when this young lady reached out to me who has this nonprofit and she does like, you know, client surveys and she said, I want to be TIPPSS compliant. I was like, whoa, how cool is that? Or like, you know, Lenovo said to us, what about finance? I'm like, oh, you're right. They would be jealous if everybody else had a better security paradigm than they did in finance.
Yeah.
A good
So
model.
how do we go there? And how do we get into the data center? Like Lenovo said, they want it, their equipment goes in the data center as well as in like the PT workstation when they walk around taking
Mhm.
care of you, right? And
Right.
so, they're thinking about those different things, which is so valuable for us. We're like, oh yeah, good point.
But
Exactly.
you should also look at industry when they used to have product teams where you have marketing and engineering, and so on, working together, meeting together to
I
discuss
was gonna,
the final product. Okay.
I was going to ask Li Feng for her opinion before, but because I knew she usually has a meeting at this time, so she had to jump.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I
but
know.
I'll introduce you at another occasion because she's
Well,
a
thanks.
great resource. Yeah.
I
Well,
think she
one
dropped
thing to
out.
also one thing to also add, it was kind of interesting that though we didn't include it in our standard, is when we thought about IoT, we didn't just think of the Internet of Things. We thought the clinical, the hospital. We thought we all these different analogies, even when we were doing the PAR. But some of the things that we didn't try to boil the ocean as we often use as example as an analogy. But one of the I thought was an intriguing thing when we think about future forward was we thought about drones and military use and specific and triage, things like this, when we thought about Amazon trying to deliver medical supplies. So there are a lot of analogies if you look in our history of this the standard that we tried to consider and and try to get our fingers around it so we didn't again boil the ocean.
The other
Yeah,
thing that was very interesting that happened at almost the same time, right after you began your program, the pandemic hit. And it
Mm,
really focused people's attention on this space. And there
good
was a
point.
lot of discussion, a lot of, rapidly developing research and resources and need for healthcare at home, need for people to respond to emergencies and all of that really elevated the discussion quite a lot. It gave us a lot more very validation of the use cases.
absolutely.
Um, and so
The environment is changing quickly and all these fires go like, so many things are changing. We're at all these pivot points.
right.
And so our role model standard is 802, 802.11. Like, they what a
True.
cute little standard, right? And now it's like an octopus, right?
Yeah, this little guy.
Yeah, it was this cute, and it went into all these different areas, and that's our role model standard that we would love TIPPSS to go into different domain areas and go down different forks and kind of like the way blockchain could be forked, but in a good way, where it's not a bad thing. And
But
going these different things. So that's what we're hoping eventually happens and people take it and run with it. So when people reach out and say, oh, how about finance? Oh, how about data centers? How about I was presenting this at the Biomedical Digital Twin New York Scientific Data Summit, and the Department of Energy was there. And a young lady who's going to be designing an electron ion collider wants to deploy TIPPSS, have a TIPPSS model framework for the collider as well as for the data center supporting the collider. I'm like, how cool is that? Sign me up, right? And all of this is especially something like that. Oy, if you get in there and reverse things, it's a big mess. So we have to be thinking
Yeah.
about these things. And so we're very supportive of any,
Well, I mean, this is a perfect example of the fact that there's a physiologic or a physical outcome to a problem set that you're dealing with. Like many other industries, that's not the case, right? But in this case, yeah, in
yeah.
many problems, it's not the
Yeah.
case.
So we hope to be able to help in a lot of different use cases, a lot of different industries and domains. We actually, IEEE and the Northeast Big Data Hub that I lead at Columbia, we're co-sponsoring a webinar series, and we did one on, I think it was decentralized clinical trials earlier this year. Now we're doing one on the TIPPSS for the energy grid. And so that will be in November. And then we're looking at other domain areas. And I'm actually lucky enough to be on an external advisory board for a project called Connect, which is distributed energy and renewables connectivity. It's like a $40 million NSF project out at UC San Diego, University of California, San Diego. So I'm on the external advisory board for that. And we've agreed that we're going to look at how we can apply TIPPSS to the test bed that we just had the ribbon cutting ceremony for this summer. so that we could look at tips for the energy grid for the future. And then I just spoke at Climate Week at Deloitte recently. It was Climate Week when the UN was in town, everything was going on in New York City. And I
You
spoke.
know, what's really nice about that is more people get to hear your voice and everyone else's voice, and they begin to understand what is this climate thing? What is this,
Mhm.
you know, security thing? And there can never be too much discussion like that. I really applaud you for getting out there and
Agreed.
putting the energy into that because, you know, otherwise it won't happen.
You got to have a voice.
Yeah.
Well, just to give you a feel for how long I've been talking about this, so for this Climate Week presentation at Deloitte, I reprised my 2012 TED Talk.
Oh, wow.
I found the slides. I did a talk at NJIT for energy and the environment back then and Smarter Planet.
Cool.
And
You're going to have to share that one now.
oh, okay.
you
and I
open the
told
can.
them, so what year is this? Oh, this is so this was 12 years ago and we still have the same problem. We really have to get on this, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
That was part of the message. So these are my slides from 2012. They were like, I'm like, I know,
Also,
right?
think about if you don't remember history, you're going to be forced to repeat it.
You
Something
know?
like that.
Yes.
But the vocabulary, like we probably have, Stan and I probably have the same slides in the drawer from 1977, 1981, 1992. And then you just have to change the vocabulary, maybe draw a few more lines, tick a few more boxes. But
Everybody has
Some new
to do
term,
that.
new phrase for what we did 20 years ago.
yeah,
The
Yeah.
problem is with what we did 20 years ago, we're doing it again today. But starting,
Right.
Mhm.
you know,
exactly.
I've seen so many
Yeah.
programs where it's like if they're working as if they're in a vacuum. They don't
Mhm.
realize that, well, gee, this was done 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In many
That's what your
cases,
mother saying, don't you ever learn?
Right. Well,
You have to say
I
that to
think
the whole
this is,
planet.
they
this
make
is why,
companies, for example, make more money by making believe there was no prior knowledge.
It's like the
Right.
big data phrase. It's like, oh, it's big data. Or I love when people say it's AI. It's like, wait a minute. It just because it's faster than a human doesn't necessarily it's AI.
yeah. Yeah, and it's the same thing. You pull out the pig, you wash the pig, put a new bow on the pig.
Mhm.
Little
Lipstick on the pig. Yes.
But we always want to appreciate diversity and diverse
Yeah.
perspectives in the next generations, because it's like I look at the younger engineers coming out, and I always think that somebody who's talking to me is somebody I can learn something from. And to me, I don't underestimate, just because they're not at
Never.
levels or don't have the titles, that they don't
Right.
have value.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that
Oh
we
no, I
see,
know you're not, because I know you.
yeah. Yeah, you do. We see the pedigree in there, and
Mhm.
and the young people teach us how they want to experience it.
Exactly. I like that phrasing. Very
They're
nice.
gonna be, I want them to worry about this now.
Right.
Mhm.
We haven't fixed it yet.
Right.
And it's gonna keep changing and evolving
Yeah.
into the future. And I want them to be able to help. So
Exactly.
I want to teach them all the stuff that we know is wrong. So that either they can put a different angle on it and say, actually, it's not wrong anymore. We'd be like, whoa, that makes it a lot easier. Or they're
Yeah.
going to be new problems. And then they have the base, And
Exactly.
we actually see the standard as being a technical standard and a process standard, but it's also like an education device. We're
Mhm.
teaching
Absolutely.
people
It's
what to
it's teaching best standards with the lessons included. And like as William was saying before, we had pacemakers and all these other things 20, 30 years ago, but there was intellectual property around it. It was easier to close it in. You didn't have like pharma was fighting with device companies. They didn't want to share the same market space. They wanted to have a pharma solution, a device solution. That's not the world anymore. We're really lucky. I'm right. Am I right, Florence? And yeah.
Yeah,
And
actually, someone recently said to me from the pharma industry that some of their research and development people have said that 90% of future pharmaceuticals will have devices in them.
yes.
Yeah.
Right. Or both. They'll be combined.
So
But
that,
the thing is, yeah. The
right?
thing about standards, right? The thing about standards is that when people come together, 802.11 is a perfect example. So is Bluetooth, right? Bluetooth.
Mhm.
Because
True.
when the consortium was put together, it benefited everyone. you know?
Mhm.
The idea that people share some portion of the intellectual property so that the standard works, so it's plug and play, so that it's safe, secure, private, all those things. People
Absolutely.
come together, they
Yep.
make the standard, and then everyone benefits.
Yeah,
And
we're
that's
not
exactly-
designing in a black box or a closed
Right.
office.
No. And that's
Yeah,
why we
but you
ran
can
this
still-
IEEE, so that it's an open standard. Coming from industry for, many decades where everybody wants to own stuff. Like I remember,
Right.
Stan, you probably remember this. Remember Fortran? There was VS Fortran and this Fortran and that Fortran, and nobody could talk to each other. So we created Linux and everybody got mad. But then you were
Mhm.
able to communicate, right?
Well,
And-
Unix was free. If you send the disk to someone, they'll send it to you.
Unix wasn't it either, because we had BSD and we had AT. Yeah, that was a mess too.
Right.
So Linux is the one that was like, egalitarian. And so what we wanted
I
was
would like to disagree on that, Florence.
Okay, just let me finish my point over, Josh. That's okay. Let me just finish my point if I might. So we wanted to brand TIPPSS with IEEE so that it was an open standard and say, oh, everybody can use it. Because we didn't want like a company saying, that's mine. No,
Right.
no. We want everybody to do it because it makes everybody safer. Right.
Exactly.
So that's why, we really wanted it to be IEEE and then UL because of,
Yeah, but
It builds an industry this way, right, Stan?
yeah, but what happens is if you look at this development of standards, things of this sort, and look at the committee structure, a lot of the committees are chaired by people who work in the industry.
yeah.
And
Well,
I've
I was
seen it,
industry.
for example, if you look back at HPIB, which is
Right.
IEEE 488, okay, same thing. That was
Yeah.
a standard, and that happened. I was on some ASTM committees as well, and they had the same problem. Because this company developed this procedure, they've been using it for 100 years, and they don't want to change. But they chair the committee, they control the committee. Okay, and the same thing with artificial intelligence. We put all the intelligence on the computer. The intelligence lies in the person who writes the algorithm.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
And so does the mistake. The mistake is there too.
right,
And yeah,
yeah, if you go back and look at computers, what's the difference between a computer now and a computer 50 years ago? Okay, faster, more memory. What does it do that's different?
well, also there are implications, right? Like in communication. You don't know where the function is residing, right? So the function combines itself with things in multiple places, which is why we need TIPPSS. We need
Mhm.
TIPPSS because we know that the functions, are
Firmware, software, service. It's at every level.
Exactly.
Right.
And we really wanted firmware in here
Yeah.
because, I
Yeah.
would go and
because
speak
you're a
it to-
hardware person.
I'm a hardware person and I know that
Yeah.
firmware is really valuable. And somebody said, it's just another attack vector. I'm like, everything is an attack vector, but you can use it for good. The encryption facility is in the firmware. And as long
Yeah.
as you don't give away your secret, that thing is really
Well,
good.
your
right?
point is so valid, Florence, is that when we worked in control systems, or when we think of a 68,000 or 6502 coding, and you were embedding them in a chip effectively, nobody said, oh, you don't have to apply software validation to this because it's firmware. And then when you start showing people that you can do an SQL injection error from a QR code, you're not even talking about either. It's physical. In injection pretty much. So we looked at all those things, but there was a point in time, and thanks to Florence for leading that effort. It's like, okay, we got to put a cap on this. We got to put some wrappers around it.
Sure.
Absolutely. Well, I think we wore everybody else down except these. So thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everybody. It's very nice to meet everyone here today. And please join us again for our sessions in the future. And the video will
Thanks
be
for organizing
available
for
as soon
us.
as it can be uploaded.
Yeah,
Thank you,
Excellent.
everybody.
Thank you,
Wonderful meeting you
everyone.
all.
I have a
Thanks,
Bye.
Florence. Thanks,
Bye.
William.
Our
Thanks,
pleasure.
you.
Stan.
Thank
Bye.
you, everybody. Be well.
Bye-bye,
be
everybody.
safe.
Thanks, Kit.
Yes, everyone should be safe, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay.